Spring 1945. An American column crosses the Siegfried Line and enters Germany. For one soldier, it is only a few miles on a map. For another, it is the border of a country whose name for years had meant something entirely different. Hitler, anti-Semitic laws, deportations, vanished relatives, letters from Europe that suddenly stopped receiving replies. Among those moving east was 18-year-old Marvin Tolkien of Brooklyn, a soldier with the 125th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. His unit did indeed cross the Siegfried Line and advance onto the territory of Nazi Germany. But imagine the moment itself. A German road sign, a field, a house, a church timer in the distance, wrecked military vehicles in one place, refugees in another, and somewhere else buildings still standing almost untouched. And an almost uncomfortable question arises. What is a Jewish soldier supposed to feel when Hitler's Germany stops being a word and becomes the road beneath his boots? Because the strangest thing might not have been waiting behind barbed wire. The strangest thing was that Germany sometimes looked ordinary. If stories like this matter to you, stories that reveal the human cost hidden behind familiar words, support this video with a like and subscribe. Here, memory matters more than slogans. Before they entered Germany, the country existed for Jewish soldiers primarily as an idea. Not everyone knew the same things. Not everyone had relatives in Poland, Lithuania, or Germany. Not everyone yet understood the full scale of the destruction of European Jewry. News of persecution and mass murder had reached the Allies during the war, but even among servicemen, knowledge could emerge gradually through reports, rumors, and encounters with things for which ordinary language seemed inadequate. And yet, for a Jew wearing an American or British uniform, this war could carry another meaning as well. One American Jewish veteran, Theodore Diamond, explained it years later in deeply personal terms. In his mind, the war was a confrontation between Hitler and himself. But the country the Allied armies entered did not look like some abstract lair of monsters. First, there was a road. Along it moved military columns, shattered Wehrmacht units, civilians, people pushing carts and carrying bundles. On the roadside stood men too old for the front, women, children. And here, for the first time, the map began to shrink. Before the Jewish soldier, there was no longer the German people as a single wartime phrase. There was an individual old man, a woman, a child, a farmer, an unarmed human being. That did not make the Nazi system any less criminal, but it made the question harder. What happens to hatred of a country when, inside that country, you encounter not only an SS man, but an ordinary human face? The road led into villages and small towns, a church tower, a shop sign, curtains in a window, a dog in a yard, a table inside a home. Traces of a life that had continued almost until the collapse of the Reich. And this was where a contradiction emerged that cannot be captured by a single photograph of a concentration camp. How could a country look almost familiar after its government had transformed the Jew first into a legally inferior person, then an outcast, then a deportee, and finally into the target of a state-organized program of mass murder? Nazi persecution did not begin with gas chambers. For years, it entered everyday life through laws, dismissals, confiscations, boycotts, humiliation, arrests, and public violence. And all of it happened on real streets, among neighbors, among people who could support it, profit from someone else's property, turn away, feel afraid, help, or convince themselves that what was happening had nothing to do with them. It would be dishonest to say that every German knew everything. It would be equally dishonest to suggest that society saw nothing at all. Historians distinguish between committed supporters of the regime, perpetrators, beneficiaries, bystanders, people acting out of fear or opportunism, and those who resisted or helped the persecuted. There is simply no single explanation for the behavior of millions of people. But for the soldier walking into a German home, there were no academic categories. There was a room, family photographs, a piano, books, a child's toy. The belongings of people who also had birthdays, dinners, arguments, favorite songs. And the question became almost physical. Who lived here while Jewish families were disappearing? What did these people know? What did they hear? What did they choose not to ask? The worst was still not visible. For now, Germany still looked like a country you could touch with your hand. A door, a table, a cupboard, a street. But then the surface began to crack. The farther Allied troops advanced, the more often they encountered traces of a system that until then might have existed only as words. Forced laborers, prisons, abandoned documents, warehouses, people in striped clothing, railway tracks leading to places where no ordinary person would ever need to go. And then the map shrank even further. We've reached the halfway point of this story. If this moment has already changed the way you look at Germany in 1945, tell us in the comments what you find more terrifying. Open evil, or evil that exists for years alongside ordinary life? And support the video with a like. On April 11th, 1945, American troops reached Buchenwald near Weimar. Reconnaissance soldiers encountered emaciated men in camp uniforms in the woods. They pointed them toward a place they described as horrifying. Buchenwald was not an extermination center like Auschwitz-Birkenau, but people there were murdered, starved, tortured, and exploited as forced laborers. And here, the story stops being a story about a country. Barbed wire, a barracks, clothing, bodies, the smell, crematorium ovens, documents in which a human being had been reduced to a number and a unit of labor. Sergeant Howard Swick was an American and a Jew. When he entered Buchenwald, he met an emaciated prisoner and told him in German that he himself was Jewish. The man could not immediately believe that a living Jew was standing before him in an American military uniform. They embraced. Then other prisoners began approaching Zwick, touching him, touching his uniform, taking his hands in theirs. Here, the map almost disappears entirely. A country has become one human face looking into another. And only now can we finally answer the question from the beginning. What did Jewish soldiers see inside Hitler's Germany? Not one Germany. They saw two realities occupying the same physical space. In one were homes, schools, family photographs, and shops. In the other were racial laws, deportations, slave labor, camps, the bureaucracy of persecution, and mass murder. They existed side by side. Buchenwald stood not far from Weimar, a city associated with Goethe and Schiller. After Liberal, American authorities forced residents of Weimar to walk through the camp and see with their own eyes what had happened there. But it is important not to replace history with collective guilt. Not every German was an executioner, and not every German knew the full scale of the killing. Yet the Holocaust was not the work of a handful of monsters existing outside society. Persecution required institutions, police forces, officials, transportation networks, businesses, military structures, and an enormous number of individual human decisions, participation, profit, accommodation, silence, and sometimes resistance. And so the Jewish soldier did not see a country of monsters. He saw something more frightening, a recognizable human society in which the state had succeeded in turning persecution into part of normal life. After that, meeting a survivor took on an entirely different meaning. Army chaplain Herschel Schachter entered liberated Buchenwald shortly after American troops arrived. He later remembered looking at the prisoners and thinking about his own family. If his father had not managed to leave Europe when he did, he himself might have been standing among them. A Jew in the uniform of a victorious army looked at a Jew in camp clothing. One had come from outside. The other had somehow remained alive inside. Liberation, therefore, could never mean victory alone. For some, it meant rage. For others, pride or numbness. The Jew, whom Nazi ideology had declared inferior, was now entering Germany in the uniform of the victorious army. But victory could not bring back the millions who had been murdered. There is one detail that almost closes the circle. After the fighting, Marvin Tolkien found himself near Bad Nauheim. There, American Jewish servicemen were able to pray in one of the few German synagogues that had survived the war. Imagine that geography. The border, the road, a house, the camp fence, the face of a survivor. And then, Jewish prayer on German soil after Hitler's defeat. At the beginning, Germany had been a single word. By the end, that word had broken apart into streets, documents, barbed wire, and human decisions. The most frightening thing Jewish soldiers saw was not only the camps. They saw that the camps existed in the same world where people raised children, opened shops, went to work, and came home in the evening. Genocide had proven compatible with the outward appearance of civilized life. That is why Germany, in 1945, became not only an image of a defeated enemy, but a warning. Culture, education, and ordinary daily life do not, by themselves, make a society moral. If you remember only 4 facts from this story, remember these. Jewish servicemen in the Allied armies entered Germany with very different levels of knowledge about the scale of Nazi crimes. American troops liberated Buchenwald in April 1945. Jewish soldiers, such as Howard Zwick, really did encounter Jewish survivors there. And after the war, Jewish religious life began returning even to German soil. When the soldier who had crossed the border looked at Germany now, he no longer needed the map. He had seen that evil rarely arrives beneath a sign saying, "Evil begins here." Sometimes there are ordinary houses standing all around it. If you watched until the end, write the code word WITNESS in the comments. Let it be a sign of remembrance.